Alright, and welcome to this tutorial where we're going to take a look at the PhoneGap camera API. Now, the camera API contains a single method, which is this camera.getPicture method. Now, this method will allow us to gain access to the device's default camera application, and we can take a picture. It will allow us to gain access to the photo library of the device, so we can look at all the existing images that have been saved onto the local storage of the device. It will also allow us to gain access to any saved photo albums on the device. Now, this method is supported on the Android, iPhone, Windows Phone 7 Mango, and the BlackBerry WebWorks OS 5.0 and higher platforms. Now, the returning value of your image can come back in two different formats. The first format is a string containing the base 64 encoded photo image, and that's done by default. Now, the second format is a string representing the image file location on the local storage of the device. Now, you're probably going, that's great, but what does that actually mean? Well, let's take a look at this first format, a string containing the base 64 encoded photo image. What that is a giant string that is being decoded and rendered out through the browser alone. So, you're probably going, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an image like this one, okay, and I'm going to copy the URL, and I'm going to go to this really cool website that allows me to convert my binary file to a base 64 encoded string, and I can just paste in the URL to that image, click on submit query, and so I can copy that string now, and as you can see it's a massive string, so I can copy that, and I'm going to go into Dreamweaver. I'm going to create an image element with a width of 297 pixels and a height of 180 pixels. And the source is going to be that massive string. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that and preview it in the browser. So now, as you can see, it's displaying this image, but it is not a file, okay? It's just this massive string that is being decoded and rendered via the browser. And that's how simple it actually is. Okay? Now, obviously, I'm not interested in all this gobbledygook right here, because that will, number one, vary depending on what image you've got, and plus, there's no point trying to explain that part. However, I do want to explain this right here that's right at the start of the source attribute. So if we take a look at that, basically what it's saying is data, image, /, and then we are defining the image format. So that right there is defining the image format, which is PNG. And basically what it's doing is it's saying, okay, this string is a base 64 string, so the browser then knows that this is a base 64 encoded string, so the browser knows what it is now, and it can decode it and render it to the user. And it's all done through the browser. It's not linking up to a file, it's not doing any of that. So that's how it works. Now, don't worry about the image format so much, okay? And it doesn't even matter what the original format of the image was. For example, this was a PNG image. I could actually render this out as a JPEG image or a GIF and so forth and so on. And as you can see now, when I hit refresh, it is a JPEG image. Alright, so don't worry about the format. You just need to define at least a format and also tell the browser that this string right here is a base 64 encoded string, so it knows what to do with it and can simply render it out to the user. Now that's the first format type. The second format type is a string representing the image file location. So it's like me pointing to this location like so. Okay, so instead of having a massive string that the browser decodes and renders to the user, we're simply just pointing to an image now. So what I can do is go back and hit refresh, and as you can see, it's just pointing to the image and displaying it like so. So the second format is simply pointing to the image on the local storage of the device. Imagine me pointing to an image on my local hard drive, essentially the local storage. It's the same sort of thing. We're just pointing to the file location. We are not interpreting and rendering a massive string of text. Okay? So those are the two different formats that we can have in our returning value of our image. Now, of course, you know, what you can do with that is pretty much limitless, whatever you like. You can render it in an image element, which is what I'm going to be doing throughout this tutorial. You could also save that data locally onto the device, and you can also, you know, post the data to a remote server. You know, whatever you want to do, you can pretty much do. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to create a very basic application that's just going to use the default format of the base64 encoded string, and then we'll move on to using the file URI. And we'll also discover a problem with the base64 encoded format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Dreamweaver again, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to delete out the information inside of the source attribute, and the reason being is because I will populate the source attribute via JavaScript. So I don't want to delete the source attribute, but I don't want anything inside of the source attribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a width and a height. So I'll just choose a width of 200 and a height of 300 pixels. And I'm going to add an ID onto this image element so I can point to it in CSS and also point to it in JavaScript. And we'll just give it an ID of image. Okay. Now I want to hide this image element because at the moment I haven't set the source attribute, so the browser will come out with, you know, like a little question mark and so forth, which I don't want to actually show them that. So I want to hide this image element using CSS, and then through JavaScript I want to populate the source attribute, and then I want to unhide this element so that the user can see the image. So in between the two head tags, I'm going to create an opening style tag, type text/CSS, like so, and I'm going to point to this image via its ID. So say hash image, and I'm going to say display none, so that will hide it for the time being. And then we can change that later on in JavaScript. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little link on the application that's going to allow them to click on it, and then we can take a picture with the camera. So I'm going to say ahref, and that's linking to nowhere. And then I want to put on this onClick event onto my anchor tag, and that will trigger a JavaScript function called take picture. Open and close those brackets, and I'm going to wrap my anchor tag around a header 1, like so. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go to the myapp.js file, and I'm going to create that function. Okay, so this is the function that is called back when this anchor tag is clicked. Okay. And so now what I want to do is I want to point to the navigator object, and then I want to use the camera.getPicture method. And I want to open and close my brackets and end with a semicolon. Now the first thing that I want to define in between my opening and closing brackets is the camera success callback function. So if we can get hold of the camera, then I want to call back this function. So I'll just call this on success. Okay, and then I'm going to put in a comma, and now I want to define the camera error callback function. So that will be just something like on fail. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is put in a comma, and this is where I put my camera options. Now my camera options need to be contained inside of parentheses. Very, very important. And I'm just going to use one camera parameter now, which is the quality camera parameter. And we'll set that to 70%. So this parameter, you need to define a number from 0 to 100 depending on what quality, and obviously that's representing the percentage quality of the image. So if I say 70, that means 70% image quality. Okay, so now that I've done that, it's time to start creating these two functions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is open my brackets, and I want to pass in a parameter, and this parameter is the image data parameter, like so. So this is the image data parameter, and that contains all of those crazy numbers and letters that make up our image. And the reason why I'm passing in the image data parameter specifically is because I'm using the base64 encoded format. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close my brackets and open and close my parentheses. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a variable that's going to point to my image element that I have right here. And we'll just give this variable a name so we can point back to it later. So I'll just give this variable name of image. Then I'm going to say document.getElementById. And in quotation marks we type the ID. Obviously Dreamweaver's found all the DOM elements with an ID. It also tells you what the DOM elements are and which file they are located in. So then what I can do is I can point to that variable, which is essentially pointing to that DOM element, and then I can change the source attribute by saying .source. So first of all, I'm pointing to the DOM element, which is that element right there, and then I am changing the source attribute of that DOM element. Okay, so as you can see, I'm now going to populate that source attribute now. So I'm going to say equals, and then in quotation marks we need to put a little bit of information in here that first tells this image what format it is, and also to tell the browser that that big long crazy string is in fact a base64 encoded string, so it knows what it is and it can render it out to the users. So I just say data image \, so this is where we are defining the file format of the image. So let's say that I want it to be PNG. Now don't worry about, you know, the file format. As I said, you could make it JPEG or whatever you want, so we'll just stick with JPEG. And put in a semicolon, and then what we need to do is we need to say, okay, well, this big long crazy string is a base 64 encoded string. So I say base 64 comma, and then I put a little space right there. So what this is going to do is it's going to put this little string right at the start of my source attribute, like that. Okay, now don't mix up these quotation marks for these quotation marks. Okay, these quotation marks here are for simply telling JavaScript that this is a string. So what it's going to do is it's going to take that string and it's going to place it at the start of the source attribute. Then what we can do is, outside of the quotes, we can say plus, and then we can use our image data parameter, and then end with a semicolon. So what that's going to do is, inside of the source attribute, it's going to put that little string right there, and then it's going to extract the information from the image data parameter, which is all those crazy, you know, numbers and letters and all the rest of it that make up the image. Okay, so that's what's happening. So now what we need to do is unhide this image element, because at the moment it's hidden. So what I'm going to do is say image.style. So we are styling this element right now. Okay, and I want to say display. So that's the display CSS property. So we want it to display as a block now. So I say display equals, and in quotation marks I'll just say block, and end with a semicolon. Okay, now what we need to do is define this onFail function. So I'm going to say function onFail, and again we want to pass in a parameter, which is the message parameter, and this parameter is essentially containing some information from the native code of the application. So this will allow us to, you know, say to the user, the operation couldn't be complete because such and such. The device doesn't have a camera. The device has switched off the camera because it's got low battery, or, you know, the process was cancelled by the user. Whatever it is, it will be stored inside of this parameter, and then we can display it to the users, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do is open and close the parentheses, and I'll just create an alert dialog box like so, with the message failed because, comma space, and then I'm going to say plus, and then we're going to use the message parameter, and don't forget to end with a semicolon. Okay, so save that now, and what I'm going to do is export this application and install it on my device. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the application. Alright, and as you can see, we have this link right here saying take a photo. I'm going to tap on that, and it's going to open up the camera's default application, and I'm going to take a picture just real quick of my screen. Okay, there's the picture, and I'm going to click on done. And now what we need to do is it will go back to our application, and we just have to wait a couple seconds, and there you go. There is the image. Okay, now what is actually happening right here? Let's go through the process step by step so you can see how it's all working. First of all, we have the anchor tag that is clicked, and when it is clicked, it calls back this take picture function, okay, which is this function right here, which, once we do that, it is going to open up the device's default camera application, and that's by default, it will do that. Obviously we can set it to, you know, look at the device's library, look at the saved photo albums on the device, but of course we haven't set that, so it's just going by default. It's opening up the camera's default application, so if you don't tell it to do anything else, that's what it will do. And then the user can simply take a picture. Obviously my picture quality is 70%, so I'm just going to take a picture. Okay, so there I've taken a picture. As soon as I click done, it's going to call back this camera success function, which we are passing in the image data parameter, and that parameter is containing all those crazy letters and numbers that make up this image. So I'm going to click on done, and then simply we are pointing to the image DOM element, and we are changing the source attribute of that DOM element, and we're putting a little bit of text in there to, you know, define the format of the image, and also tell the browser that this is a base 64 encoded string, so then the browser knows what to do with that string and decodes it and renders it to the user. And of course we need to make sure that we add our string onto the end of there using our image data parameter. And then obviously we're unhiding it, we're displaying it as a block level element. So now let's see what happens if I was to quit the process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again tap on my anchor tag, which is triggering this take picture function right here. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm simply going to click on the back button, saying, oh no, I didn't want to click on that. So I'm going to click on back. And now it will fire the camera error callback function, which is this onFail function. And again, we're passing in the message parameter, and the message parameter is containing a message from the native code of the application, and basically what that's saying is fail because that's that little string right there, and then the message, which is camera cancelled. Okay, I simply cancelled the process. So that's how it works. Very, very easy and very, very simple. So now what we're going to do is take a look at the second format. Now the second format is a string representing the image file location on the local storage of the device. Basically it's pointing to the image location. So first of all, let's take a look at some of the issues with the base 64 encoding format. The issue with it is that obviously newer devices are getting better cameras. Okay, they're getting like 8 megapixel cameras. Now encoding an image that is basically 8 megapixels is huge. Okay, it's still is slow on this application, and this camera isn't exactly fantastic. But you think about, you know, a full HD camera on these devices, such as the iPhone 4S that's getting, you know, 8 megapixels and so forth, and other devices, that can really cause some big memory issues because it's a massive file, and encoding that file is simply going to take too long, and it could even crash the phone, which is something that we really do not want to do. Now, I obviously don't really like to use the base 64 encoding. I prefer actually using the file URI format, because to me that makes a lot more sense. You take the picture, it saves it onto the local storage, and then you simply point to that directory. So there's no encoding and decoding and all that rubbish. All that's happening is the browser is simply going to that location and displaying the image like you normally would. So that is why I prefer the file URI format. Okay, so what we're going to do is we first have to override the default format. Okay, so the default format is the base 64 encoding, so we don't want it to do that anymore. So the way we override it is we use the destination type parameter. Okay, so as you know, the user clicks on the anchor tag, it fires this function. Okay, now inside of here, between these opening and closing parentheses, we have our optional parameters. Now I'm going to put in a comma after this parameter, and so I can add another parameter. And the parameter that I want to add here is the destination type. Now this is very case sensitive with your optional parameters. So, you know, with type there needs to be a capital T, and, you know, everything else lowercase and so forth. So be very careful about, number one, your spelling, and number two, the capitalization of certain characters. So then what I'm going to do is say comma, and then I'm going to say camera with a capital C, dot destination with a capital D, type with a capital T, and I'm going to say dot file underscore URI. So now what this will do is it will override the default returning value format from being the base 64 encoded format to now being a string that's simply pointing to the location of where the image is stored on the device. So now that we've done that, we need to slightly change the parameter that we are passing in, because this image data parameter is only good for the base 64 encoded format. Obviously, with the file URI, it's going to be pointless because we are not getting the image data. It's not a massive string, it's just simply pointing to the location of the file. So the parameter that we need to pass in on this camera success callback function is image URI in capitals, like so. Okay, so if we are using the file URI format, then obviously what we want to do is pass in the parameter to the camera success callback function image URI. And now obviously we don't need this string to tell, you know, this element what format it is, and also we don't need to tell the browser that it's a base 64 encoded string because there is no string at the moment. There is nothing to do with that. All we have is a simple string that is pointing to the location. So I can say image source, image URI. Okay, it's that simple. Because obviously all that's going to do is it's going to put in a string right here that's simply going to point to the file location, and that's it. Job done. Just like you normally would. And again, I want to display it. And we can leave the camera error callback function, which is this onFail function. Okay, but we still are, you know, passing in the message parameter, and again that can display, you know, whether the user has cancelled the process or whether the device can't do it for some reason. So what I can do is save that now and export that application and install it on my device. So I've gone ahead and done that. So what I'm going to do is open this up right now. So here we just simply have a link, and when we click on it, it's going to open up our device's default camera application. And I'm going to take another picture like so. Okay, there it is. There's my picture. I'm going to click on done. Now watch how fast this is. Boom, straight there. Before we had to wait a couple seconds before we even had the image up, but you can see it's a lot faster, and it's, you know, a lot less of a strain actually on the device because it doesn't have to, you know, work out all the encoding process and everything else. It just saves the image and then it simply points to that location, and then we display it. That's it. So that's pretty cool. Now with the file URI format, where we are pointing to the file, we don't actually have to define a width and a height. Now if you don't define a width and a height of this image element, then it will actually go to the actual width and height of the image. So I can delete them off now and install that application on my device. So let's have a quick look at that. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this, take a photo. And I'm going to just take a quick photograph. Looking pretty cool. Okay, click on done. And now you'll see that it goes to the actual size. Well, it appears my stuff has stopped working. Typical. But yeah, as you can see, it's actually pretty big. And it is a fairly big size. Okay, so you might probably want to define the width and the height of this, because obviously it is a little bit big, especially for a device of this screen size. But however, it's working nonetheless. There we go, it's responded again. Okay, so basically that's what it's doing. It's just giving us the full size. Okay, so as you can see, I believe, well, I pretty much know that using the file URI instead of the base64 encoding format is a lot better. Okay, it's a lot less intensive, and also, you know, it doesn't take up so much time actually displaying it to the user. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And as I said, you know, you can do whatever you want with that information. I'm just, you know, rendering it in an image element. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is some more camera options. So basically, our camera options are optional parameters. So we've already seen two of these optional parameters in action, which is the quality parameter. That's a number from 0 to 100. That's representing the percentage of the image quality. Then we have the destination type optional parameter, and this allows us to choose the format of the returning value, which we've already used to, you know, return the format value of file URI. Okay, and if you don't define the destination type parameter, it'll just default to base64, but you can set it to base64 if you want. But for me, it doesn't make any sense. You might as well just not type it, and it will just default to the base64 encoded format if that's the format you want. Otherwise, you can set it as file URI. Then we have the source type parameter. This allows us to set the source of the picture, so where we're getting the picture from. We can get it from the default camera application. We can get it from the photo library, or we can get it from a saved photo album on the device. So let's go ahead and take a look at this now. You can open up Dreamweaver, and obviously all those parameters are contained inside of the opening and closing parentheses, and I want to put in a comma right here so I can add another parameter, which is going to be my source type parameter. And I can say camera dot picture with a capital P, source with a capital S, type with a capital T, dot, and then we can say in capitals camera, which it's set to that by default anyway, but however that will go off to the device's default camera application, or we could set it to photo library. Okay, so what I can do is I can save this now, and I can export it and install it on my device, which I've already done. So what I'm going to do Let's demonstrate this now. So now when I tap on this, we are changing the source type from the default camera application to open up my photo library. So this allows me to look at all the existing photos and images that have been saved on the device. So I can tap that. Now it's not opening up the default camera application, it's opening up my photo albums. Now there is a little bit of a quirk with the source type parameter on Android. Basically the photo library and the saved photo album do exactly the same thing. They both open up the album. Okay, so that's just a little quirk on Android. Okay, so at least I can see the saved images on the device, so I can select, you know, my camera. I can select one of these, and there we go. We have our image right there that's being displayed. Now, what we want to do is we want to set a target width and a target height. Okay, so we use the target width parameter and the target height parameter so that I can, you know, scale this image down a little bit because it is pretty big. Okay, now obviously I can define that in the DOM by adding a width and a height attribute to my image element, or even doing it with CSS. However, I want to do it with my optional parameters. So what I can do is I can put in a comma right here, so I can add in another parameter, and then I can say target width. Now the target width is basically a parameter that contains a number that's representing the pixels width across. Okay, and if you use the target width parameter, you must use the target height parameter as well. They have to be both together. And also the aspect ratio is maintained. So if I say 200 by 200, imagine a little box, 200 by 200, so a perfect square. And my image might be a bit more rectangular. So what it'll do is it will scale the image inside of it, keeping its aspect ratio. So it might not be 200 width, okay, or it might be slightly different, okay, but it's trying to fit inside of that box. Okay, that's basically what's happening. It's a target. So target width parameter, I'm going to set this to 200. And then obviously I'm going to put a comma in here, and then that allows me to add another parameter, which is my target height parameter. Very important. And I shall set that to 200. Okay, so I can save that now, and then I can export that and install it on my device. So let's have a look. Open up my application. I'm going to select an image like so, and as you can see now, it is actually putting that image inside of my target width and height, but again it's keeping the aspect ratio of the image, so it's not squashing the image, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's the target width and the target height parameter, and remember, if you have one of those parameters you need to have the other. Okay, now we have the allow edit parameter. This will allow simple editing of the image before the selection is made, and this is a boolean, so that's true or false. So what I can do is open this up and say comma allow edit parameter, and we simply say true. So that will allow them to make a simple edit to the image before making their selection, and false will stop them from making a simple edit, okay, before they make their selection. Alright. So that is again an optional parameter. However, the allow edit parameter doesn't actually work on the Android platform, so unfortunately I can't demonstrate this to you. But it's there nonetheless. Then we also have the encoding type parameter. This allows us to choose the encoding of the returned image file. So that could either be JPEG or PNG. So again, the Android platform doesn't support the encoding type parameter. So I'll code it out to show you how to, write this all out. However, unfortunately, I am unable to demonstrate it. So I'm going to put in a comma, and we want to say encoding type with a capital T, encoding type camera with a capital C, dot encoding with a capital E, type with a capital T, dot, and then in capitals I can either have the format as JPEG or PNG. It's entirely up to you. Okay, but again, the encoding type parameter is not supported on the Android platform. So unfortunately we'll have to give that one a miss. Now, the image that I'm getting from my local storage instead of my camera application is being returned as a file URI. Okay, you don't have to have it returned as a file URI. Okay, you could delete that, so now it will default to the base64 encoding format for our returning value, but we need to just change our code right here. So I can say image data, so that is the parameter that's passed into this function, again because we're back on the base64 encoding value that's being returned. And on the image source I need to put in that little string again saying data, comma, and then I can say image backslash, and I can say JPEG. Alright, put a semicolon in there and say base64, put in a comma and say plus image data. Okay, so we know what that does. Okay, and so now what I can do is export that, and I can install it on my device. So let's give it a quick whirl. So now it's pretty much going to look like it's doing the same thing. However, instead of the returning value being in the file URI format, it's going to be in the base64 format. So it's going to take that image and it's going to encode it, and then it's going to display the image. Okay, like so. Very, very easy and very, very simple. Now finally, the last optional parameter we're going to take a look at is the media type parameter. Okay, now the media type parameter is basically setting what type of media we can select from. So we can select pictures only, videos only, or both pictures and videos. Now this only works when your source type parameter is set to photo library or saved photo album. Now like I said, photo library and saved photo album do the same thing on the Android platform. So what I'm going to do is, just for argument's sake, so that I'm demonstrating this, I'm going to change this from photo library to saved photo album, like so. And then I'm going to put in a comma right there so I can add in another optional parameter, and this time it's going to be the media type parameter. So again, make sure your source type parameter is set to either photo library or saved photo album. Obviously, if you don't put in your source type parameter, okay, then it will just default to camera, which will then open up the device's default camera application. Okay, so what we're going to do is inside of here we're going to say media type, okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say comma, and then we're going to say camera dot media with a capital I, capital M, type with a capital T, dot, and then we can say picture, which that is set by default. So again, if you don't define the media type parameter, it will just default to picture. That will only allow us to make a selection of pictures. Okay, we cannot select any other media type bar from pictures or images. Okay, so I'm just going to change this to video. Okay, I'm going to save this. Now there will be a little bit of an issue because obviously we are returning, you know, this video back in number one a base 64 string, which you ain't going to get, and obviously we're rendering out in an image element. But however, nonetheless, it will allow us to select videos. So what I can do now is save that and export it and install it on my device. Now let's give it a try. Open up the application, take a photo, which obviously I probably need to change that text right there because we're not taking a photo anymore, but now you can see that it's just giving me the videos. Okay, so I'm only allowed to select video media, and of course the final option bar from picture and video is all media. Now you will see there is an issue with this, okay, selecting, you know, all media for your media type parameter when using the base 64 format for your returning value. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save that and export it, and we'll see exactly what is the problem. So now we can select pictures and videos. Okay, so let me show you this. Go inside of here, tap on the link, and now you can see we get this really nice, interesting dialog box come up, allowing us to select from a gallery, select music track, sound recorder, and also voice recorder. So that's pretty cool. But I just want to click on gallery, and now you'll see that yes, it goes to my albums, but I can see the photos and the videos as well. Okay, so now I can select videos and pictures. Okay, you can tell they're videos because they have that little play symbol at the bottom of their tile. Okay, so I can select videos and images. Now, even though I'm selecting an image, okay, we still get this little question mark. Now, if you are using the base 64 format, okay, for your returning value, you don't want to set your media type parameter to all media or video. You want to set it to picture. Okay, now if you want to be able to select all types of media, including pictures and obviously video, then I need to change the returning value format from being base 64 to file URI. So again, we use the destination type parameter, and then again we say camera dot destination with a capital D, type with a capital T, dot and then we say in capitals file underscore URI, like so. And don't forget to put in a comma right there. Okay, so now that we've changed the returning value to be the file URI, we don't want to pass in the image data parameter, we want to pass in the image URI parameter, and I want to delete that out, and the source will just be image URI. Okay, so we are using the image URI parameter, which is simply pointing to the location of the media that we have selected. So I can say all media, and it will work fine now with the file URI. Now if you don't set the media type parameter again, it will just default to picture, and then it will be fine to actually use your base64 encoding. But if you're allowing any other selection such as video or media, then you need to be using the file URI as the returning format value. So I can save that, and let's export it and install it on the device. So let's take a look at this. Let's see if now I can just simply select a picture, and it should work. So I'm going to say gallery, and I'm selecting picture, and there we go. Fantastic. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at some of the quirks. Okay, so Android ignores the allow edit parameter. As you heard me say before, I couldn't demonstrate that. I also couldn't demonstrate the camera.encoding type parameter because that is just not supported on the Android platform. Also, the camera.picture source type, photo library, and saved photo album do both the same thing, which is display the photo album. As you heard me say before, they just do the same thing, which is not a massive problem. Now, the BlackBerry has quite a few quirks with our optional parameters. It ignores the quality parameter, so you can't set the quality of your images. Also, it ignores the source type parameter, so you can't select your source. Basically, all it will allow you to do is open up your default camera application on the BlackBerry and take a photo. That's all it'll let you do. It won't let you go into the library or see any saved photo albums on the device. So of course, if we can't gain access to the photo library or any saved photo albums on the device, then the camera media type is not supported, because if you remember, the camera media type parameter is set to only work when your source type parameter is set to photo library or saved photo album. So if your source type parameter is not set to photo library or saved photo album, which on the BlackBerry it can't be because it's not supported on the BlackBerry platform, then obviously this media type parameter is not going to work. So that's unfortunate. Also, the application must have key injection permissions to close the native application after the photo has been taken, so there is, a few permissions that we have to put in. Also, using large image sizes may result in the inability to encode the image on later model devices with high resolution cameras. Obviously, as you know, the newer models such as the Torch 9800, they have the newer type cameras on them, and obviously because the camera quality is so good, encoding them can actually cause memory issues and cause your application to crash. So that's definitely not what we want to do, and the way you get around that is very simple. You just use the file URI instead, and I'd rather use the file URI personally because it's quicker, okay, and it's actually easier in my opinion. So I'd rather do it like that. Now, the camera Media type is obviously not supported because my source type parameter is not supported. Now the PARM has a few quirks with our optional parameters. It ignores the quality parameter, so we can't set the quality of our images. Also, it ignores the source type parameter, which in turn will mean that the media type parameter is not supported. Also, it ignores the allow edit parameter, so the user can't make a quick, simple edit before making their selection. The iPhone also has some quirks with our optional parameters. It sets the quality of the image to be 50% or below to avoid memory error on some devices. So obviously, you know, the newer iPhones have got, you know, there's amazing cameras on there and HD and all the rest of it. And obviously with the base 64 format, that is going to cause some serious memory errors and could crash the application. So with the iPhone, it sets it to 50% or below. Now, when we use the destination type property and set it to the file URI, so the returning value is in the file URI format, then the photos are saved to the application's temporary directory. So they're not saved in a permanent directory, they're just in the application's temporary directory, and as soon as the application is closed, it will delete the file. Okay, so obviously it's not a permanent measure. You'd have to do something more to actually save that image onto the device. So that's a little bit of a downer. Also, if you want to, you can use the navigator.filemgr, basically it's a file manager API, to delete the file if the storage space is a concern. And last but not least, the Windows Phone 7, which probably has the best support for our optional parameters, which basically it just ignores the allow edit parameter, so we can't make a simple quick edit before we make our selection. Okay, but that's about it for Windows Phone 7, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So have a play around with the options, mix and match, and obviously see what's compatible and what's incompatible with all these different platforms and different optional parameters. So we have a good play and see what you can come up with.